Hello, everyone. I'm laughing because as I'm trying to make this introduction, my kitty Abeja is moving everything around my space, so that's fun. Anyways, here we are, another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I have the pleasure of speaking with Jen Soriano on the show, and for those of you that listen to both Radically Loved and Outside the Studio, Jen, this is the second time I've had the opportunity to speak with Jen, and so I will link in the show notes to our first conversation on Radically Loved. That was episode 519. And in it, we talked about her debut essays on heritage and healing. The book is called Nervous. And in that episode, we talk a lot about the book. And so if you're curious about that and the backstory, please listen to that episode. It's great. And there will be some overlap today because I do want to touch on it again with you, Jen. But without further ado, welcome to the show, Jen. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm so happy to be back, getting a chance to talk to you. I am doing well. I have definitely learned that sleep is one of my best medicines, and I've been making sure that I've been getting the sleep that I need, which is a lot actually. So I feel unusually rested and happy.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's great. Oh, this is a great place to start. I think like so many of us, sleep hygiene is a big topic of conversation these days. And it's kind of like one of those things that we all know we need to do more of and we need to do better at, kind of like eating your vegetables and exercising regularly. But I think a lot of us struggle with falling asleep, if we're on our gadgets or we're used to technology at night, or if we're just busy and, it's hard to unwind at the end of the day. And then also I think a lot of us struggle with staying asleep. Maybe we fall asleep easily, but we wake up in the middle of the night and we get restless. Or maybe we feel like we sleep fine, but we wake up and we feel really, really tired and just lethargic and not energized.
Yeah.
So if you wouldn't mind, I'd just be curious to hear, what is your sleep routine like? Do you have anything because you're saying you're feeling rested. Did I hear you say that? Or are you feeling like you're getting a lot of sleep?
Very unusual thing to say in this society.
Yeah.
But I do actually feel very rested. And sleep hygiene is a funny thing because in some ways, I think someone like me who has a chronic illness that affects my sleep chronically, I probably need sleep hygiene routines more so even than most people. But at the same time, I don't have very good routines. And one of those reasons is because I am really bad at routine. Routine and I are not friends. I enjoy doing different things all the time, every day, which is, I think, a challenge often. But the other reason that I don't really have a very strong sleep routine is because my sleep is so chronically disrupted. My normal around sleep is to treat it as something that I have to get within a 24-hour cycle, as opposed to just thinking of it as one long stretch at night, because I rarely get normal stretches of sleep at night, because of how my nervous system operates on a very hypervigilant level. Sometimes it is straight up pain that will keep me up, but oftentimes these days, because my pain has gotten better, it's this sort of I call it the sort of like, it's like this limbo state of activation where my mind isn't even operating. I think a lot of us can relate to that place where our minds are just constantly spinning like hamster wheels, and so we cannot sleep because we're thinking about, oh, I got to do this, and I got to do this, and I got to do this, and I'm worried about, the 10 things I have to get done yesterday. But for me, actually, these days, it's been a lot less of a mind running thing and a lot more just like the body, like the sort of like the fan in the computer when it goes to sleep, just like constantly roaring. And that's what happens with me. And so I have had to really construct a lifestyle that I've started to call like a lifestyle that's in CRIP time, which is a disability justice term around yeah, timing that allows for flexibility. And so my consulting work and my writing work allows for flexibility. And I slept 5 hours in the middle of the day yesterday, because that was the only time that I could sleep. I didn't sleep at all the night before. Um, and that really worked for me. Like I just, that with that 5 hours, I was able to kind of reset and then get a good night's sleep that was more like 8 hours. Um, so yeah, so I think a lot of people have sleep problems in our society, because of a lot of biological reasons, but also because of a lot of just social reasons too, right? Like we're not really encouraged to think about sleep as something that's super important. Um, yeah, and then we're connected 24/7 almost into this blue light of digital access and engagement. So I really appreciate, I don't know if you know about the organization, the NAP Ministry.
No. Ooh, tell me.
Yeah.
Tell me about the nap ministry.
Yeah, I don't know if they think of themselves as an organization. I think it's actually an individual, but they
Hmm,
basically launched this movement for rest, for radical rest. And I think that
cool.
it's really changed the conversation, because now that when people I know think about rest or a nap, people are like, "Oh yeah, 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 that's a good thing." But like 5 years ago, it was like, "What? Like, why are you resting? Why are you napping? Like, that's lazy."
Mhm.
You should be doing something else to be productive, or So I think there's some good some beginnings to good cultural shifts around sleep.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and there's I think there's a couple of things here that are kind of insidious in our culture, and that is like I should be doing something else that's productive, and napping is lazy. And yes, I agree with you that that concept is changing, I think, for the better, although I think it's slow to change. It's so
Yeah.
deeply ingrained in us, you know? Um, what was the other one? Gosh, I lost my train of thought. Kind of like busy is a badge of honor. And I think that just
Oh,
goes
yeah.
hand in hand with this
Is it bad?
idea that our value is extrinsically linked to what we produce, not that we are intrinsically valuable just by virtue of being alive, and that we're taking care of ourselves in the way of sleeping for 5 hours out of the day if we need to sleep 5 hours out of the day. Um, so I think this is a really important conversation, and I'm glad we're talking about it. And
Yeah.
the NAP ministry sounds really cool, so I want to check this out.
Yeah.
Um, okay, one more question on sleep, and then we can there's so many things I want to touch on. I want to touch on somatic healing, yoga and body work in particular, because I know you have experience in yoga as it pertains to pain and your healing journey, as well. I want to talk about so many things in the realm of trauma in terms of reproductive justice, prenatal and postnatal care, family leave, universal pre-kindergarten and childcare, and mental health care for children. That one really stuck out to me. This is Jen's list, by the way, but all of these things are hitting really close to home. And I think that last one, mental health care for children, because I have my earliest memories are of being in therapy as a child, and feeling like it's a hard thing to kind of articulate, but it almost feels like it felt like there was something really wrong with me when I was young. But
Mm.
having therapy and therapists around me as a support system when I was young also taught me that that was a tool that I could use for the rest of my life, and I still consider it a tool. Um, to help me like have a mirror and a reflection of what's going on inside my head. And so I learned that at the age of 5. So mental health care for children is, I think it's really important. Um, okay, so backing up to sleep, there was one more question I wanted to ask.
Oh,
um, and that is, I'm curious what you do at night when you're not sleeping. Are you doing things? Are you
right.
trying to sleep?
I wrote most of my book in the middle of the night.
Mm.
Yeah. And the very first essay in the book, that's called A Brief History of Her Pain, I would say I probably wrote 95% of that at night.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm always curious about that in terms of when I'm having a dream. I don't know if this ever happens to you, but sometimes I'll have a dream and it'll be so vivid, and I'll wake up and I'll have this knee-jerk reaction that tells me, you got to write this down, you have to remember it. And sometimes that will be at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or whenever. And I'll feel like this little war going on inside of me of, well, you should be sleeping right now, so you shouldn't go do that because then you'll be awake. And maybe if I were like you, Jen, I would have a book by now.
Yeah, it got to a point for me where I was just like, well, I'm not going to fight it anymore.
Mhm.
And I mean, and maybe it's different for people who don't have such serious sleep disruption. But I do remember reading, again, at a time when I couldn't sleep, like a reading on WebMD or something like that,
Mhm.
that it can be a good idea to not try to force yourself to sleep, but to just get up and do something else. I mean, I think the suggestions were more like, do something quiet, make yourself some tea, like,
Yeah.
as opposed to turning on a computer and writing. Um, but it works for me it definitely works for me to get up and go do something else. But that's because I've been able to create a daytime structure where I know that I can make up for it during the day. So
Yeah.
I think that part has been key. And I mean, I'm not going to lie, there's also some nights where I can't sleep and I'm like, I'm going to watch Netflix. It's not like, it's like you got to be productive all the time, right? Like what we were saying before, it's not just another way to extend the 8-hour day into the night. Um, there's times where I'm just like, I'm just gonna really do nothing and just relax. But the important part was like the not kind of beating myself up for not being able to sleep and finding
Yeah.
something else to do instead that just felt like a good way to pass time.
Yeah. I think that's so key in so many things that we endeavor to do and endeavor to do well, is the not beating ourselves up for, we're all our own worst critics. I really believe that. And I'm going to switch topics to yoga now, and just setting aside the immense value of yoga in terms of healing somatically, not just somatically, soma of the body, but also mentally and spiritually,
Mm,
um, and the body work that comes along with it. I think it all depends on how we approach something like that. If we are comparing ourselves in our yoga practice to someone else's able body in some certain way, or if we're getting up in age and our body isn't doing what it used to do, it's not as flexible maybe, or something doesn't come as easily. Even something like yoga can have that effect of like, we could beat ourselves up over it for not being quote unquote good enough, or having the
mhm,
right attire, or having the right body type. I mean, my teacher was told she didn't have the right body type to teach yoga, and it's like, this is a practice that is supposed to be universal, accessible to all bodies, and isn't supposed to be about how well you do the splits or put yourself into a pretzel. I mean,
mm,
heck, the asana came thousands of years after yoga was first recognized as a practice in and of itself. So,
mm.
um, I think it's just important. I'm going to get off my soapbox now and let you talk, Jen, but
I love to hear it. Yeah.
I think it's important to call something like that out. So, tell me about, and now I remember, I'm thinking back to our first conversation. We were, I think we had finished talking about the book, and you mentioned to me, hey, I have background in yoga. Did you say you were a teacher at one point? You had certification?
Not, no, not a teacher, just a
Okay.
student for a long time.
And you found some healing in that journey, right?
I'd say that when I first started yoga, which was in 2000, um, my friend Amy Suzara just took me along to a yoga class. I would say that I marked that as the beginning of my healing journey, actually. And it didn't show up in the book because, there was just other focuses that I was paying attention to, specifically kind of the community-based um, collective practice pieces of activism and community building. But within that, there were people like my friend Amy who then introduced me to specific other types of healing practices like yoga. So she took me to my first yoga class, and from there, I just I think of it as almost like, nothing's linear, but a very consistent, steady practice of being more and more in my body. And I think that was the start, is that I had never felt like it was okay to be inside my body. And yoga started to show me that I could be inside my body in a way that that made me feel mostly good. And I say mostly because there were also times when yoga practice would sometimes aggravate my pain. Um, but I'd say overall, compared to the pain that I was in as a baseline, it was really clear that the yoga that I was doing was a type of movement that was overall teaching me how to expand and not be in such compressed kind of fight or flight shapes. Um, and also that it was a practice where, as you say, it's not just somatic, it's spiritual and emotional and mental. But having time to be able to kind of calm my mind was also really necessary, and pretty key to my healing. And I'd say that it is the one type of body movement that I've been able to do without serious repercussions. Like, for example, different sports that I've done. I've had pretty much every sport that I have tried, every type of form of other exercise, I've had to stop, um, and maybe pick up in small pieces. But I haven't not been able to consistently do those things, like just even like biking. And I'm not talking about like spinning even. I'm talking not talking about like, Tour de France level like bike races. Just biking from one place to the other, would throw my back out. And other things like dancing, that people can really associate with also a healthy body practice. Those would actually send me, like, just dancing, like practicing a dance for my wedding would send me to bed for like a full day. But yoga, I think, because of, and I would be curious to hear what you think, because of the ways, I guess, that the asanas themselves um, have been developed over so much time, and with so much attention to the alignment of body, spirit, mind. Um, the type of pain that I might maybe feel after a yoga class, I knew it was going to go away. In ways that, using my body in other ways, it was not true for other types of movement.
Mm, that's so cool. I love that experience. Yeah, I think it I mean, I'll pontificate on that a little bit in terms of my experience as a practitioner and my experience as a teacher. And I'll say that um it's so relative to the specific kind of practice that you're doing, and the teacher and the teacher's background, and how willing you are to slow down and listen to cues that not only the teacher's giving you, but always to the cues that your body is giving you. And breath is, I think breath is one of the key differentiators in the practice of yoga that really allows the student to slow down enough to notice, okay, is this working for me? Okay, do I need to modify? Okay, do I need to intensify? Okay, am I okay? um, because there's such an emphasis on breath as being very much a part of the practice. It's an invitation to use it as a tool to notice,
Hmm.
all of those parameters around how to tweak things. That's how I like to teach. I also teach yoga from a trauma-informed lens, so my teaching style is very inviting of self-inquiry, and it's inviting of doing only what your body allows you to do in that moment, knowing that every day it's going to be different. And, from 1 minute to the next, it's like, oh, I don't know how I just did that. I gave myself a thumbs up.
Mhm.
Riverside has some interesting little things. So, yeah. So I guess the only other thing I would say is, because it's a practice that has developed over the centuries, um, as a mindfulness practice, as a spiritual practice, as a meditative practice, into what now is kind of known colloquially as an exercise practice. It really has roots in being self-aware. And I mean, the goal of it always has been to become your highest self, to reach your highest good, to become self-actualized, to use the words of Yogananda. And so I think that's why it's like so transformative for many people. Certainly it can be. Um, but then again, you just always have to really be listening and paying attention to your body and
Mhm.
noticing if what the teacher's suggesting is something that's going to work for you. Because just like anything else, like all the other things that Jen mentioned, if you're not being aware and paying attention, yoga can be a practice that you can get injured in as well. The asana piece of it, I would say in particular.
Mhm.
I don't know if that helps or makes any sense, but I hope it does.
Yeah, yeah, especially the breathing part and the sort of aligning breathing with movement, and how that's a really distinguishing factor from other types of things that might be considered just exercise, you know? Um, yeah, and the
Yeah.
mindfulness. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Mhm.
so the one last thing I'll say about that is that we do all of this asana in particular in our commercialized variation of yoga. Um, to the purpose of all of that movement and poses and all of that stuff is to prepare the body for the final shavasana and then the final meditation. And so many of us skip that. That's what
Mhm.
you just spent that whole hour doing, preparing your body for, so that you could sit still, so that you could focus your mind on your breath, so that you could meditate. And so many people will get up and leave or kind of fidget throughout or feel restless. Well, that's why you're doing the movement first. So there's a purpose for it, but we, I think, sell ourselves short when we don't stick around for our final rest and our final meditation.
Yeah,
Those are, when I
yeah,
talk about the fruits of the practice, that is the fruit of the practice, is being able to be in your body and have it be a safe place. What Jen said earlier. That's why we do the practice. Um,
yeah, and that has been its biggest gift to me. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure, for sure.
absolutely. What other kinds of body work did you find helpful on your healing journey?
So around the same time that I started yoga, I started getting chiropractic treatment. And I think chiropractors, people have can have strong opinions about them, but I think it's just like any other type of modality, where if you can find a good chiropractor, they're going to be good for you.
Mhm.
But there are also some not great ones out there. But I luckily started going to someone who was fantastic. And she told me when I first had a session, she was like, "This is going to change your life." And I was like, "Yeah, whatever, we'll see." But she was right. I could immediately breathe better after just a couple sessions with her. So I had a lot of kind of structural issues in my body that the combination of chiropractic and yoga was the combination was extremely helpful. And I also did craniosacral therapy, or received craniosacral therapy.
Mhm.
That was extremely alleviating, I would say, to my pain. I'm not sure at this stage, after doing lots of years of craniosacral therapy, how much it actually helped with any kind of getting to the root cause of things type healing. But what I know is that when I was having trouble functioning and had brain fog and and pain, that craniosacral would alleviate those symptoms for sure.
Yeah.
So those are three of those three together. It's probably the most healing trio of things that I did early on, and then it started to change later to more somatic therapy, actual kind of in office, psychological and somatic therapy and touch therapy and somatic experiencing is what and EMDR is the kind of stuff that I started to do later.
Okay, so I have a question, but I want to give the audience some context because I kind of just jumped into this and I didn't really introduce you. We didn't tell your backstory. Although, yes, I did mention you could go listen to Radically Loved episode 516 because I do believe we give quite a bit of context. But Jen, could you share with us like a summary of why so much pain? It's something that you've, I think, basically were born with, feeling like there was never any alleviation from it until adulthood, and you started to unravel the root causes and find these, like you just mentioned, your healing modalities, and now today you're in a place where, correct me if I'm wrong, you're feeling a lot better. I don't know that pain you would say would be absent, but you are feeling better.
Hmm.
So would you mind, let's maybe back up a little bit and give some backstory about pain.
Sure. I mean, you already started to give a great summary. Uh, the the book was inspired by the fact that I had some pretty excruciating pain for a long time that nobody could tell me what it was from, and it was constantly dismissed by doctors and even some alternative practitioners. And so, like many people who live with complicated systemic illnesses that may or may not involve pain, I had to do a lot of my own sleuthing and a lot of my own trial and error experimentation with healing. And in the book, I talk about how one of the root causes that I found of this pain uh, was actually psychological trauma. Um, and layers of that. But it's actually not just psychological. One of the points of the book is really that there's this false divide, right, between psychological and physiological, between mind and body, between mental and physical and spiritual as well. And and so the trauma and the layers of trauma that I end up tracing my pain back to are actually a combination of psychological trauma and also physical trauma, such as from birth trauma, that I figured out much later in life probably happened to me. And I think, the point really is in sort of sharing the particulars about my story is to say that there is a sort of general commonality, I think, to people who experience any kind of complicated pain, or complex, illness, which is that there's multiple contributing factors usually, and that's part of what makes it hard for Western medicine to identify. And as a result, honestly, in terms of healing, it also takes multiple interventions and practices to heal. And unfortunately, we don't have a system that will cover that type of comprehensive care, right? And what gets covered instead are things like pharmaceuticals that can cause more trouble. Don't get me wrong, medication is sometimes absolutely needed and necessary, and I have needed medication along the way. But that was medication in concert with things like yoga and bodywork and somatic therapy, and psychotherapy, and other things as well. And so yeah, I mean, that's some of my background, and the overall point is really to be able to make a case for comprehensive integrative care, both within the traditional health system, although we know we need to reform that pretty drastically, but also in the social structures around us. Like, it's very much a public health kind of approach to health and everything. because our bodies are everything, right? We kind of embody everything that's around us, and so we deserve that same complexity of care.
Yeah. Oh, that's so well said. Thank you for sharing that. I also found it, I got to read the book. I had the opportunity to have an uncorrected proof. So I don't want to quote anything directly since it's out in the world now. And, but I found it so interesting to read about like your family history, your culture, and just knowing that your father is a neurosurgeon. And so you grew up kind of like in the realm of having medicine around you, but it wasn't necessarily the kind of medicine that you needed. And then
Exactly.
part of that was a contributor to the trauma and to the pain, right? So
Mhm.
I was wondering if you wanted to add anything to, I guess, the family nucleus story or anything around cultural heritage to that.
Sure. So, uh, a lot of the book is also about how connecting with ethnic and cultural communities can be healing when the practices are about remembering collective history, preserving things like language. In my case, it was remembering histories of resistance against colonization in the Philippines and being able to take collective action uh, to further correct some of the ongoing injustices that happen and human rights violations that happen in the Philippines. Um, so there's a lot of emerging studies that actually show that that type of connection to heritage, identity, that then gets manifested not in exclusive ways, right, to exclude others, but in ways to be able to generate new practices of healing and new practices of of advancing progress and well-being, right, um, have been shown to reduce symptoms of things like depression in people, have been shown to increase feelings of agency, right, which are core. Feelings of agency are core to mental wellness. Um, so I write about that in the second half of the book, and my nuclear family, I think, was very much affected in both good and bad ways by a history of colonization and migration. And so, there's something that some Native American scholars and social workers talk about, which is that not everybody is going to be equally affected by these types of histories. Like some people can walk around and be like, whatever, history of colonization, that's in the past. That doesn't affect me at all. Um, but then there's going to be other people who are actually sort of tasked with carrying more of this load and with healing this unresolved grief from things like colonization, migration, um, and that when people like that take on the task of healing, they're doing it not just for themselves, but for everybody else in their extended families and ancestors that came before them and generations that come after them. And Eduardo Duran is one of the people that writes about that concept in his book called The Soul Wound.
Eduardo Duran.
Hmm.
Sounds like a really good book. Is it Duran? Duran?
That's right. Hmm.
The Soul Wound. I'm writing it down. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I feel like one of those people. I carry ancestral trauma on my shoulders, and I'm curious what you think. Do you feel like someone's kind of born into that role, or is it something they adopt over? I mean, is it the sensitive person who takes that on? How do you develop into someone who feels like I need to be the healer of this trauma?
I personally do believe it is something that person is born into. I do think it's a sensitivity piece, and then it's probably triggered or turned on or catalyzed, if you want a more positive verb for it, by lived traumas, which almost all of us have. So,
Yeah,
you
interesting.
know,
Yeah.
when
Well, that's okay. So I know what's lighting you up right now, and we can certainly add to this list, but I want to leave some time to talk about reproductive justice in terms of pre and postnatal care,
Mhm.
which goes hand in hand with family leave, and then universal pre-K, and childcare, and then the topic that I mentioned at the very beginning, mental health care for children. Where do you want to start with this? What do you want to say?
So when I was writing this book, I thought a lot about, you know, where does this leave us? Because
Yeah.
I'm an activist at heart, and I do
Mhm.
believe writing can and should be a tool for change. So I wrote the book, and I thought to myself, I want this book to be a tool. And then the question became, well, a tool for what? And the 14 essays in the book cover a lot of ground. I think folks who are listening or have been listening can get an idea of it just from our conversation so far. Um, and I decided that, if I was going to lean into any one particular area uh, of advocacy, what would it be?
Mhm.
And so I asked myself that. And I thought about, what does it mean to break cycles, right? What does it mean to break cycles of intergenerational and transgenerational trauma? And through the research that I did for the book, I came to the conclusion and the decision that, oh, for me, what that means is to really focus in on trauma-wise care for birthing people and for young people, because of what I mean, it's just sort of intuitive, right? Like any society that's worth its salt should be investing in that. And yet, our country actually is fairly child hostile, I would argue, in terms of priorities in spending and investment, and also has one of the most abhorrent uh, maternal and infant mortality rates of any industrialized nation, particularly for Black and Native American um, birthing people and their infants. And so, the neuroscience tells us, right, not just from sort of like the intuitive gut place of like, this should be important, but the neuroscience tells us, and epigenetics tells us that our biological and even psychological makeup can be affected by the environments that we're in, even when we're a fetus inside our parent. And then once we are born, uh, the period from about 0 to 13, if not a little bit more, is a really, really, really sensitive period for our neural development, and that's the brain development, but also really just our entire nervous system, such that, any kind of adverse experiences that happen in those periods can absolutely set you on a track of either well-being or something much more challenging than well-being, for the rest of your life. And it doesn't mean it can't be reversed, but there's already some rails set that are going to be harder to pick yourself up out of. And this is where I'm not sure if folks have heard about, like, ACEs and adverse childhood experiences scales come from, which by the way are not meant to be self-rating scales, um, but meant to kind of describe um, what can happen at a biological population level. So, um, once we understand that, then it kind of just makes common sense then to say, well, why wouldn't we invest more in the care of our birthing people, in the care of, newborns, and also in the care of children and adolescents, not just around sort of academics and like standardized test achievement, right? But in holistic care and the abilities of caregivers to be able to provide that holistic care. And if you look at the way the system is set up, or if you've experienced it at all, we know that there's it's a upstream fight to be able to get get children and parents what they need to be able to provide trauma-wise, safe and nurturing environments. So I think that to me would be, hey, there's a presidential election coming up in 2024. The candidate I'm going to vote for is going to be one that's, that actually believes in investing in packages like this, um, and
Yeah.
not necessarily just sweeping all of that under the rug.
Yeah. I love that. That's so well said. So I was, as you were speaking, I was thinking about, do you remember this from the Radically Loved conversation? We kind of started, I asked you a question along the lines of, well, what kind of world do you want to live in?
Oh yeah.
And we got to dreaming a little bit about what that future might look like. Um, and I feel like I want to ask you a similar question here around, I mean, you kind of just said it, right? Like, what kind of world do I want to live in? What kind of world that invests in a social healthcare package for birthing parents and children who are developing and who are young. And I guess what I'm wondering is, yes, I agree with you. It'd be nice if there were a presidential candidate who believed in all of this. It was part of the platform. It was something that when we voted for that person, we could believe that that was something that they would put into action. And I want to believe that that's true, and I want to believe that that's possible. And I also wonder if there's anything else that we can do in the meantime. I do realize that a lot of this change has to come from that high level to make a difference. But is there anything else, I don't know, that we can do in our own personal lives that makes a difference now?
Absolutely. Creating our own communities of collective care is a necessity, right? Because that day may never come where the government's priorities are upended and we spend a lot more on this type of care, as opposed to spending so much on, you know, missiles um, and and weapons of war, other weapons of war. So in the meantime, I do think that, being able to lean into community and the work that it takes, because it does take work. It does take work to build and maintain community, um, is necessary. It's going to be more necessary than ever. It's definitely how I was able to have a healthy birthing experience and postpartum experience, was through communities of care where friends would say they would take a week off just to help me. And so I think that leaning into that more so than ever, resisting isolation and the need to always just like consume and like outsource and just like pay people for things. Although I will say, obviously, if you have domestic workers that you hire, you do have to pay them and pay them well. But there's also, the friend networks and peer networks where we create more and more channels for mutual aid. And that to me is part and parcel of a trauma wise society where we're building from the ground up while we're also trying to reshape the policies and practices and priorities of investment at different levels of government and also, institutions in our own cities and regions.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. So, Jen, Nervous is your first published work. Am I right about that?
It's my first full length published work. I also have a
Okay.
chapbook. Hmm.
Okay. And is there something, if you're at liberty to speak on what is next, what are you working on? Maybe you just kind of gave us a little sneak preview. I don't know. But I'm curious about
So many
what are you
I'm
working on
working on
next?
so many things. One of my favorite writers, Aurora Levins Morales, who was one of the biggest influences in the book on the book, I would say. She's a Puerto Rican writer who wrote a book called Medicine Stories. She talks about how she's always got 12 burners on at once. I was working on like 12 projects. That's pretty much like what my next step is. I've started like sketching ideas for a novel. I also have ideas for like 3 different essay collections. And then I also have an idea for a project that involves um, researching more about like 18th and 19th century Filipino poets.
Ooh, that sounds
So
cool.
there's a lot, but all of it has to do with culture, heritage, and healing at some level.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, the themes continue.
Oh, I love it. Well, I look forward to seeing what comes out next of those many projects on your plate. And I want to point out Jen's website is Jen Soriano, which is SORINO.net. NET. I'll make sure that link gets into the show notes. Is there another place anywhere else on the socials you like to connect with people, Jen?
Yeah, absolutely. On Instagram at Jen
Okay.
Soriano Writes.
Great. Well, we'll
Yeah.
make sure to put that in the show notes as well. And if you're watching online, I'm holding up a copy of my advanced proof one more time for you to see the beautiful cover of Nervous Essays on Heritage and Healing by Jen Soriano. Jen, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I always feel so hopeful and inspired after spending some time with you. So thank you so much for showing up today and sharing with us.
Thanks for having me again.
Well, everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't, be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.